Welcome to Alienating the Audience, the show that explores the deeper side of science fiction. I'm Josh Jennings, the thinking man's nerd's producer emeritus. And today we're going to be Inappropriately Human.
Hey, Mr. Jennings.
Hello, Mr. Heaton.
I am very excited to talk to you. And what a fine evening we've been having for everybody that is not with us right now, which is literally everyone that's not you and me.
Right.
We are out camping.
We are indeed.
We are in the Scamp. The Scamp is now becoming a recording studio again. And there's a beautiful Milky Way above us. There's a full moon out tonight. We've just been sitting around a campfire. We decided to retreat into the Scamp to host this episode. But what a fine weekend we've had.
Oh, it's been amazing. We had a really good time last night at your place.
Tell them how late we were up, Jennings.
For a couple of old guys like us, we were up till 2:30.
2:30 in the morning.
Dead sober.
Well, not
mostly
dead sober.
dead.
I'm going to say mostly sober.
Mostly dead. We were just mostly dead by the end.
Sober implies no alcohol.
That's true.
We were can drive a car level sober.
Yeah, we could have driven the children we hung out with.
Yeah, we were hanging out with some 21 through 26, I believe.
Yeah. But we had a good time. We played some piano and sang some songs, and we
played Super Fight, which
played
is
Super Fight.
One of my favorite. Did some ghost stories.
Oh yeah,
it was there was a lot of fun. It was good stuff.
Good times. Yeah.
And now we are going to finish this beautiful weekend by doing the most self-indulgent thing I have ever done on this show, or quite possibly ever in general. We are going to. So the man that my new book is dedicated to is going to interview me about it. So I am going to talk about myself and my book, and the guy I am talking to, I dedicated it to. So this is just a feedback loop of self-indulgence.
Remember the episode of Star Trek where the Enterprise kept blowing up and then coming back and blowing up again? Yeah. This is that, guys.
Yeah, but I feel honestly, I feel like I've earned this. I've hosted this show 2.5 years. I get to have a self-indulgent episode as opposed to all the mildly self-indulgent previous episodes.
Well, I think it's only appropriate that we start with the first page, which is the dedication page that says, "For Jennings, damn it."
Yes, that's right.
All right, that's going to be the first 30 minutes of this podcast.
Just talking about that. Well, actually, let me plug this. I'm going to put up, because the books also come out on Audible. Mm-hmm. It is now available on Audible. So if you want to hear it in an audiobook form, you can. I think most people probably will prefer that since they know me as a talking head rather than a writer.
You didn't get Morgan Freeman to read them?
I didn't. I did it all myself. I did the whole thing. However, I've also probably put out the Charlie Chaplin story that we've talked.
Oh, right.
I don't know why I'm calling that regarding your timeline infraction.
Yes.
Since I wrote it, that was by the time this comes out, will probably have already been out on the feed, or it might come out the following day. I think since we'll talk about it, it would make more sense to precede this. So that one story will have already been out. But for anybody that for some reason is still listening to this, that hasn't bought the book, now would be a great time to buy Inappropriately Human, 21 short stories by Andrew Heaton, dedicated to Josh Jennings.
And if it carries any more weight because I'm not the bloviating bastard trying to hack, like sell his own stuff, please, guys, go buy Heaton's book. It's really good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of diversity in it. You will laugh, you will cry, you will be moved in places. You will be touched in places, some of them inappropriate. But
that's why it's called
Inappropriately Human.
However, to make a point, I've got a couple of people have sent me very nice emails about it, and I will very likely print them off and put them on a refrigerator. I'm so happy with them.
Yes.
But somebody said one of the people sent one that I like where he's like, I knew it would be funny. You played a story on the political orphanage, but then I read it and was like, oh, there's actual science fiction in here. Like you're actually playing with premises. And that's true. I'd say most of the book is that. Yeah. Most of the book is I pick a science fiction premise that I think is interesting to explore, and I go with it. There's one that I would describe as literary, that's just good fiction. Yeah. And then there's a bunch of funny stuff too, but there's also like basically Black Mirror minus the cynicism kind of thing. Or what it is a Twilight Zone.
I think so. So that's a thing that you should look for when you buy the book. You will find a few stories that are humorous stories, but to really delve into the science fiction angle, the thing about your writing, one of the many things about your writing that I really like, is that when you write a serious piece, something that's not meant to just be humor, the humor is so organic that I seriously, when I say you'll laugh and cry, like in the same story, there will be stories in there that at least it moved me to tears once or twice. Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was fantastic. I want to since I'm steering the ship for once.
You're right. We've now changed this to where I think I am the yacht owner and you are the captain.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I'm the one who's going to run us into the island.
I'm just drunk in the back room. You're the one actually at the steering wheel. Right.
So I want to talk about a little bit about process, because I suspect that some of your listeners are aspiring writers or writers themselves.
I suspect all science fiction enthusiasts are
aspiring writers.
Science fiction writers, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about process, because you and I, we're almost the same age. We're a few months apart. We have been writing probably about the same length of time.
Yeah.
And so we grew up together in the sense of learning the writing process and the publishing process.
We literally our friendship solidified at a writer's camp.
That's right.
We were in high school.
That's right.
Yeah.
I still remember you. Like you and I have sent.
And the thing that kept us in contact was I mailed you a VHS copy of the finale of Star Trek Voyager.
That's right.
So we had to stay in contact.
We had to stay in contact so you could get it back.
So writing and science fiction were baked into our friendship from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah. And so anyway, what I would like to ask you first of all is now, how do you come to the decision? I've got a lot of stories that I presume, I know that some of the stories were stories that you had written a while back that maybe needed an update or some touching up or whatever, but they were stories that you'd had for a long time that you really wanted to do something with. And then there are new stories that you've written since then. At what point does it sort of coalesce in your brain? You know what? I should put a short story collection together.
Yeah. So you're right. The oldest story in there, the two oldest stories in here are Simulacrum and The Man Behind the Curtain, which I wrote in 2010, I think. I wrote them right when I got back from Edinburgh to DC, so they're a decade old. And the newest stories were written for this short story collection like 6 months ago. And so they definitely have a range of time in them. The original short stories I wrote, I had originally hoped to get published at various magazines or blogs or whatever, and then through that get a deal to have a book published.
Right.
And then here recently,
the Stephen King way.
So I like getting into the nuts and bolts of it. I have a bunch of books that aren't published right now. So they're sitting at my coffee table. You saw them this weekend. I've got just a straight up funny one. That's the Craigslist one that you all will hear about in a couple of years when I publish it. But it's just sitting there. It's ready to go.
Right.
I've got 3/4 of a travelogue that I'll get done here in the next couple of years. I've got a full novel that I wrote about 10 years ago now. That I will probably publish next year, and then I've got a nonfiction book that I'm hoping to get published. Looking at all of those, I think what I'm going to start doing is trying to publish just one book a year, because I now have a platform with which I can sell them, very fortunately.
Right.
And it's also, we're entering this kind of cool period of history for writers where it used to be there were only, well, I think to really back up, like in 1880, I get the impression if you wrote a book, you could just walk into a publishing house and go, "I wrote a book," and they'd go, "Oh, it's amazing!
Let's publish it, shall we?
Would you like us to publish it for you?" And also, like or you go back to like 1750, like everybody was illiterate, like the world was functionally illiterate, so you were just writing a blog for your friends and people who knew your friends. All books were functionally blogs for your friends, because but. When our lifetime, within the last 100 years, you would have to get a literary agent, and then the literary agent would then hopefully secure you a deal with the book publisher, and that was the only way to do it.
Right.
When we were in high school, you could theoretically go to a vanity press, but if you did that, you were going to have to buy 3,000 copies of your book, which
Right.
meant you were going to probably just impoverish yourself doing this kind of thing, right?
And not only that, but it was seriously looked down upon in the
Yes,
publishing
it
world.
was.
And
If
if
you did
anybody
it-
found out that you
right.
had done it, you were
You
never
were
going to
done.
have a working
that
career.
meant you were a failure
Yeah.
if you went that road. So on my end, I'm kind of at the point now where I'm like, well, I would rather just spend my time writing the books,
Right.
and then build up podcasts, and then if I can market the books through the podcasts, fantastic. I'm not going to spend another 5 years pinging.
Of course, if he ever gets a deal with a publisher, he'll drop you guys like a potato.
No, I love you. I will always be here in the back of your head. I would like to get a publisher for a couple of projects that I think would benefit from it, or a larger publisher than Last House Standing, the one that published this one, but which we can talk about more in depth if people are interested in that. But suffice it to say, I have a bunch of books, and I'm now going like, rather than waiting for a tidal wave of Random House to pick me up and give me these major book deals, I'm okay publishing them through a smaller press and marketing them to my own audience, and I'm probably going to do it once a year for the next 5 to 6 years. Like, that's without me even having to write anything more at this point in my life.
Right.
And looking at that, I went, I was looking at these short stories, and I was like, I really like these. And I started looking, going, I have enough. Like, I counted the word count, and I was like, this is a novel length book. There's plenty of these to have in here. And went, I'll compile these. And also wasn't sure, what else am I going to do with them at this point? And like, I know that you relate to this as a writer, Jennings, that you feel like when you write one of these works, it's this weird thing where it's not even ego. It's a desire to be finished with it. It's like I have been pregnant with this for 10 years now, and I would really like for this zygote to get out of me.
What we're saying, ladies, is we get it.
We get it. Absolutely. For all the women that have squeezed a watermelon through a keyhole, we totally understand, because Jennings and I have written books.
That's right.
And it's the same thing. But no, I was like, okay, I want this to get out there and my mind to focus on other things. And then looked, and lo and behold, I thought that I needed one or two more, I thought, to really kind of round it out and complete it. And the newest ones that I wrote were regarding your timeline infraction,
which is my favorite story in the book.
Thank you. Yeah. I think it's very funny. And the dating survey that's kind of towards the end, which is really more of a vignette. And that's something I intentionally did in this the anthology as well, Jennings, is really, if I'm being very accurate with this, I should have called it like Inappropriately Human, 7 novellas, 10 short stories, and 4 vignettes, or 5 vignettes. Because technically, if you go through the contents, there's actually 22 things in the book. But one of them, I was like, I can't even claim that one's a short story.
Not a short story.
But
a little bonus.
I did want to have little funny vignettes as sort of like a palate cleanser.
Sure.
After ones that are more substantive, where we're doing like a good, like 12,000 word kick, which is longer than a normal short story.
Give you just a little dollop of sorbet.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So I was aware of this process as it was happening. You and I have talked about it multiple times, and the interesting thing is I know that from the time that you had the idea to the time that you actually have released it, a lot of work went into this, because it isn't just that you took a bunch of old stories and hastily wrote a few new ones.
Edit them all. There was an editor that went through all of this. We had a proofreader.
Right.
I went through and cut a lot down. There were stories that I was going to put in here that didn't make the cut.
Right.
That's
one of the things I admire.
You're not getting just like the recycled.
Yeah, that's kind of what
surrender
I was
bag from the meal that I couldn't finish at the actual bookstore.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that went into this, a lot of thought, a lot of care, and it shows in the products. We did, or you did, a book reading. What is it now? A month or two ago?
Yeah, it was right after my birthday, so mid January.
Right,
book reading, yeah.
And had a packed house, and everybody loved it. You got a lot of applause. You did a few readings. It was everything I could do not to interrupt it and do something to like crash the party.
I think it would have been funny if you just kept going, and it's dedicated to me.
Yeah.
Your triumph is my triumph.
Yeah. Or sort of standing up after every reading. Are you not entertained? But a lot of work goes into these things, and you One of the things I admire about you, and I'm one of the closest people to your writing process on earth, as
Sure.
you are to mine,
Yeah.
because you and I have literally been sending each other things to edit.
To the point that I have to keep this in mind when other people ask me to look at their work, because you and I have been talking to each other long enough that I don't need to fillet you.
Yes.
Because I think you're a good writer,
Right,
and
right,
vice
right.
versa, right? So I can be reading something you wrote and been like, no, you're not doing this, isn't working.
Yeah.
This thing, and it doesn't mean you're a bad writer.
Right.
It means you as a good writer can do better than this. And then people,
And the same goes the other way.
right?
Yeah.
Same, yeah. But when a lot of the time, and I have to remind myself, a lot of the time when people give you their work and they ask you for input on it, what they're asking you for is validation.
Right.
They're not asking you for help.
And furthermore, the other side of that coin is a lot of times when you ask someone to edit something for you, what they take from that is, oh, I have a quota of things I have to find wrong with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's not right at all. If there's nothing wrong, you leave it alone. There's a little tip for editors out there. You do not take your ego 100% out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Heaton and you and I have been sending each other things for 20 freaking years now. And we do have that established rapport. I think we probably edited each other's first books, right? Like the trunk novels, the stuff that'll never come out.
The stuff that won't come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I have a novel that will never be, I don't think will ever be published. You've got a novel, yeah.
And they're both they were fun, and we edited each other. So anyway, so moving on, I was curious, where do you see, because this is a balance of science fiction and humor, did you in the process of bringing all of this together, did you look for a way to make sure that it was evenly balanced, or did you just assume that was going to probably naturally take care of itself?
I intentionally adjusted the placement of the book to try and set people's expectations of what the pacing was going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
So the first short story, which we can talk about, is Simulacrum. And the reason that I put that in there, not only is it chronologically the first time it was written, the reason I put that there specifically, I think Simulacrum has some very funny moments in it, but it's straight up science fiction.
Absolutely.
And
it's really good science fiction.
Thank you.
I really liked it. I hadn't read it in years.
Yeah.
And when I read it again, I was like, wow, this is even better than I remembered.
Thank you.
I was very impressed.
And it's straight up science fiction, but I wanted to put that one first rather than a laugh out loud one, because I wanted people to what I didn't want to do is have two laugh out loud ones and then one that's not very funny, and people go, well, that one sucks, right? So by putting Simulacrum up first, what I'm doing is I'm framing the book for you where it's like, hey, this is a science fiction book that you're reading.
Right.
It's going to be funny at times, but this is sci-fi. And then I put in The Man Behind the Curtain second, which I think is the best story in there. I think it's the best written story in there. It's my favorite. And I put that in there as well because I wanted to have that kind of emotional framework there, because I think anybody that purchased it, listens to the show, knows that there's going to be humor in it. And indeed there is. There are some very funny stories in there, and there's lots of funny vignettes. I wanted to do that. But overall, though, what went into the stories on a granular level was not an attempt to balance humor and science fiction. It was really more of there are some that are just straight up comedy pieces.
Sure, yeah.
The ones that are not straight up comedy pieces, generally there's some premise that gets stuck in my craw that I'm just like, that's an interesting thing, and I'm going to keep needling that until I finally end up writing a short story about it, because it's interesting to me. Like one of the stories in there, I don't even think it's that good of a story within the spectrum of the collection. I would rank it kind of lower down, but the premise is interesting, and that's Willpower Inc., where in Willpower Inc., the premise to that story is, in the future, you can outsource, like a person can download into your body and use it as a puppet with your consent.
Right.
And for a lot of people, they just don't go to the gym anymore. They have somebody do it for them. That way they don't have to go through it. But there's also this guy that handles your hangovers for you, that you could just hit a button and he'll come in.
I remember that.
And the story's not as good as some of the other stories. I wrote that a few years ago. The plot's not great, but I do think the premise is interesting. And the premise is basically dealing with to what extent should we outsource our problems to other people, even if we can?
Yeah.
And the moral of the story is kind of at the end. The main character ends up going, you know what? I think I need to do with this thing myself, right? It's almost like a morality tale. And I think, like a lot of science fiction, is It's either exploring premises. I mean, I think science fiction ultimately, I think, is about the exploration of humanity. And it's looking at humanity through a novel lens by investigating it from a different premise or a different perspective of, Star Trek classically did this of, there's a planet that's kind of like the Old West.
Yeah, right.
But it's run by a robot. What happens if a robot makes it a peaceful planet? And like what you're doing is the reason that's interesting to us is you're going, what would we do in this situation? It's able to highlight that different issue to us. And so anyway, I was mostly concerned with the individual premises and the aggregate stories over trying to balance humor with insight.
Well, let's explore one of those right now. Let's talk a little bit about Simulacrum. Can you give just a basic overview that doesn't give too much away to the audience?
Yeah.
I love this story, and again, I want to be clear. I had read it when you first wrote it all those years ago. Right. And I remembered liking it. I had totally forgotten the ending, so the ending actually surprised me this time around. And the build up to it, the honestly, the world building that you do in it is just beautiful. I love this story. It's not my favorite because my favorite is the one that makes me laugh the hardest, but it is a wonderful story. So give us a short little synopsis of it.
Right. So Simulacrum is from the perspective of an archaeologist in the ruins of Miami, Florida, in some distant future. I think I have the date there. It's like 1,000 years hence.
Right.
That. And what you realize is happening is there is an archaeological dig site. They're very excited because they found all these robots of humans. These aren't human archaeologists. They're from another planet, and they are. One of the things they do is they go to planets that have gone extinct. They find as much archaeological stuff as they can, and then they build android approximations of whatever species it was, and they take it back to their home planet and put it in a museum. And this is something that they find. So they're thrilled because they find Disney's Hall of Presidents.
Right.
Like, this is great. So they have like all their dead chiefs, and you can see how kind of they walked and talked and stuff, and you hear the tone of voice. So they're able to kind of rebuild those. And but what they really want to do is like they're early on. They're like, well, the problem is you want to have more depth than we're getting. So like he talks about like the Nixon unit,
right?
Like the Nixon unit, it's like it'll gibber on and on about Cambodia and about realpolitik. But if you ask it like, are blondes pretty? It can't talk. Like, we don't know. We don't have any of that data. We're aliens. We don't know. We just have this stuff. And then they get so excited because they find a laptop that had somehow survived the nuclear apocalypse. A bunch of lead pipes fell on it.
Right.
The data's been safe, and it's some compulsive blogger who recorded it. Like, he's tweeting constantly, he's Facebooking constantly.
Didn't you say in the story like he was the kind of like the guy who like lived in his parents' basement type of guy? Yeah.
And he's also he's one of those guys who's just, like every meal he takes a picture of it and puts it on Instagram.
Right.
like
which I've been guilty of.
But just lives through this thing, and so they're like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
This is what we wanted. We needed this guy, and so they create a new android body, and they download all these memories into it. And over the course of the story, like the two things I'm playing with in that story, there's two macro issues. The first one is the title, Simulacrum. And a simulacrum is a representation of a thing which never actually existed. So a simulacrum would be like
if you built a robot of Paul Bunyan.
Right, yeah. Or for that matter, you could say like Leave It to Beaver is a simulacrum of the 1950s because it's this idealized version of the 50s that didn't really quite exist. Or maybe it existed in anecdotal miniature, but like not a lot of black people in Leave It to Beaver. It's also not talking about all the ladies that were on like doing antidepressants because they were trapped in their home, right? So a simulacrum is that it is a fake approximation of a past thing. And that was one of the things that I was fascinated with in that story is we are putting so much of ourselves on social media. And my background's in history. I was an undergraduate in history.
Right.
And I can tell you that in history, everything we know of that's a primary source, because most people, not you're reading a history book and summarizing it, but when you're actually doing primary research in history, you're looking for the actual data and you are analyzing that data. 90% of it is junk we left behind by accident.
Yeah.
I'd say like most of history is just stuff in garbage heaps and broken pottery that we're trying to analyze. And then after that, it's letters and propaganda.
Receipts, things like
yeah,
that.
Receipts, broken pottery.
Bills of lading. Like I think at one point I read in the British Museum, the number's going to be wrong, but something like 10,000 tablets of cuneiform.
Right,
that,
yeah.
And there's only so many
probably
people.
Just bills. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's only so
ox.
many people who can read cuneiform now, who can translate it, and so they have to go through it very, very slowly. And most of it's just like, oh, you bought
right,
my
and it's just
cattle.
us trying to infer that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Like one of the weird things about our civilization that we live in is scientists, or like I shouldn't say modern anthropologists love garbage dumps. Our garbage dumps, like one of the things they can do is they can infer how many people use condoms when they're having sex based on how many there is in a given foot. So like they're going through the garbage dump and they'll dig down and like, they kind of have a general idea of like, well, 3 feet down, that's going to be from 1950.
Oh, wow.
Whatever. And like, because there's two different data sets here. There's the data sets of people claiming they always use a condom when they have sex. And then there's how many people are actually doing that all the time. And they can go through and go, okay, we have X amount of condoms for this amount of people because we know that the dump was being used by this amount of people. And they, I don't know all the metrics they're using.
It's almost like that's their practice. Like they're practicing for ancient archaeology.
Right, yeah. And so, but anyway, my point is that, and then the other two things are letters and propaganda.
Right.
Letters, get more and more infrequent the further back we go in history, and propaganda is like most official court history in the world's history has been like Saddam Hussein's official historian you're trying to understand this from the guy paid by Saddam Hussein to describe the Kuwaiti invasion. Like it's like so it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by all of that, and what I find very interesting about the current situation we're in, where all of us can now leave these big digital footprints in the world, is it doesn't tend to be the stuff we're deep about. Like,
right. At all.
You're going on there and you're like, man, I hate Mondays. Here's a funny cat meme. And like what I found kind of disturbing, and I wrote that story right after I'd worked for Congress, and Congress had at the time just purchased the all tweets in perpetuity.
Oh, right.
Now I believe they've now scuttled that because tweets are so prolific that they can't keep up with it. But at the time, they were trying to record all tweets in perpetuity, and I was like, all the people that you're recording these tweets of are going to be understood as asinine, gibbering idiots in the future. Like if you were to go back, like imagine that everything you knew about your grandfather was just crap he said to the bus driver when he was drunk on the way home. Like that's it. It's just like, man, the weather's been too hot. Like that's all you know about. Man, my grandpa hated hot weather. That's all you know.
Right.
And so I was very interested in that, and that's one of the things that the character's also dealing with too, because Anthony, the character in this that's been reassembled by these archaeologists,
Right.
they don't want him to know that he is a simulacrum. They're afraid that his programming will not be able to handle this, and they want him to think he's a human being. And he tells them, listen, they explain the system to him, why we got to get all this data, where we want to build these things. They'd be very similar to you. You can even hang out with them. You'd have friends and things. And he's like, okay, please don't reassemble me from this crap, because you would just have the crap that I left behind. You wouldn't have anything deeply personal important to me, and you would create this airhead version of me. And the archaeologist is thinking like, oh crap, this is what we did. And so
right, he's predicted it in reverse almost.
Yeah. So that's the kind of that's I think the biggest premise that I'm playing with in that story. The other one that I am fascinated by, and we don't have to relitigate this, but we've done an episode on the Fermi paradox.
Right.
And
he's saying, by the way, we don't have to relitigate this because last night we relitigated it and it got passionate.
It was me, Jennings, and 3 people in their 20s, with Jennings like standing up and yelling, "There's too much space. There's too much time. There's no Fermi's paradox." But kind of in short, the Fermi's paradox, as it's described, is that there's so many planets in the galaxy. There's presumably a lot of life in the galaxy, presumably a lot of intelligent life in the galaxy. Why have we not encountered any of it yet? And one of the more pessimistic interpretations of that is because all life kills itself.
Right.
That the near misses we had during the Cold War, where we almost had nuclear annihilation, are in fact a statistical certainty, and that every civilization blows itself up before it can really move on past the atomic age, which is the premise in this short story.
Right.
I won't go into great detail on this, but the premise in the short story is that basically the reason these archaeologists are here is occasionally a civilization will develop robots before it blows itself up. And so robots are just the final end point of evolution. And
Right.
they view themselves that way. In the same way that we view ourselves as successors to lesser apes, robots are like, right, it goes single cell, multi-cell, jellyfish, ape, human, robot. And
Right.
like we are the end point of evolution. And these particular robots go around looking at blown up civilizations. And I thought, while grim, I thought that was an interesting thing to think about of like, if civilizations all have a sell-by date.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Like, I don't think that, but I wanted to play with it in that story.
So that's, I mean, Heaton, you're giving the audience kind of an x-axis of world building with this story. I want to give them just a tiny y-axis of actual plot without giving anything important away either. This story does, in addition to being an interesting premise or a couple of premises that you really unpack in a wonderful way, it also has a story arc that involves flying
like a heist,
dirigibles and a heist.
Dirigibles, it's very
Heaton. It's
there's robots and blimps.
It's a wonderful concept.
And I'll say I really like the narrator in this story because the archaeologist is just enough of a shyster.
Yes,
like he's like, because they're not anhedonic robots, they're like androids, right?
Yeah.
But like when you talk, he's like very concerned about promotions,
right?
And he also will just say like kind of dickish things about his coworkers, and there's just enough of like selfish ladder climber in him that I think he becomes a more believable character because you know that he's petty. That's it.
He's petty.
There's just a touch of pettiness to this character that I think makes him it gives him a little bit more grit and
he's definitely not a hero of the story. I don't know that there is a hero in the story, honestly.
No, I don't think there is. Yeah.
But it's listen. So please go buy a copy of Heaton's book. Get other people to buy it, because the more people who buy it, the more money he makes, and the more money he makes, the more likely he is to put out another book.
This is true.
This is how capitalism works, folks. But don't just buy it. Don't buy it and put it on a coffee table. Read it, because it's fun. It's like the stories in this are.
And I'll add, if you've been listening to the show for the last 2.5 years, and you enjoy the way my mind works and the science fiction that there's a very good chance you'd enjoy the science fiction I wrote myself.
You will enjoy it. Like maybe not every story will hit you quite as hard as every other story, but it's worthwhile. It's fun. It's not. I mean, this is not a 1,000-page book. This is a pretty easy read. Please buy copies of this. You will enjoy it. So let's move on to some other stuff.
Okay.
Did you want to talk about The Man Behind the Curtain? I know that's your favorite in there. So let's do a minor deep dive on that as well.
That is my favorite one in there. I think the characters are the most well-rounded in that one. I think the characters are the best thought out in that one. I relate to the protagonist in that one more than a lot of the other characters in the book. And I think the writing's very good on it. And I don't mean within a scale of this book. The writing's
I get it. Yeah.
So the man behind the man behind the curtain. It's weird for me to say this because I didn't write it this way, but it actually is kind of dealing with privilege. The main character is two things. He is he's a good kid. He's like 17, I think. He's on the one hand very parochial and very unworldly. He is from Morningwood, Oklahoma, which he describes as the most boring place in the world. It's the first time out of the state. He's a virgin. He's he is not somebody that is really been out there and seen the world. In addition to that, he is from a comfortable middle class background. Not crazy, but like he's going to college. It's foregone conclusion. All of his friends are going to college. He didn't really know you couldn't go to college. He didn't know that was a thing. And this is where I relate to him. He does not have the ability to just kick blindly against people and things because he's angsty. He's a teenager, but he has enough forethought and he has enough permissive mind to realize that he can't just lash out for the sake of lashing out. In the same way that, like, it drives me nuts. If you go to the movie theaters, I do this less than I used to. When I used to go to the movie theater, and like someone will be in line and they're angry that popcorn costs $9. So they're just chewing out a pimply 16-year-old kid that has nothing to do with the prices, and you're like, hey, look, you're making this kid's
Is this
life.
why you stopped going to the movies with me?
Stop going. I'm tired of you yelling at 16-year-olds. But that for people that relate to that, of like being able to, like, you being angry doesn't justify you swatting at unrelated people.
Right.
This kid has that in a very mature level, and so while his friends are just, kind of lashing out and rebelling, and it's fun because they smoke and they fuck and they drink, and like he can't do that, and his parents are very reasonable, understanding people, and so like he starts smoking, and his dad's like, "Why are you smoking?" And he's like, "Because I like smoking." And he's like, "Do you like the flavor?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "Well, it causes cancer. Like, you don't like how it tastes and it's cancerous and you're smoking it? I mean, you can do it, just don't do it in the house." And his dad is like, so he stops it, right? And what the kid comes up with, that I think makes this a fun story and kicks it off in a really fun way, is he realizes, like, oh, this sucks. I'm not doing anything rebellious, and like I'm gonna have this like weird midlife crisis. So he steals his father's hearse, because his father runs the town funeral home, a mortuary, and just takes off and picks up a hitchhiker who comes from a very different background. She's an orphan. She did not go to college. She, I guess, graduated high school, but barely, and has no support network, has no expectations. And it's kind of a coming-of-age story of this young man meeting this young, I don't want to say buttoned-up man, but young, nice, reserved, naive kid meeting a very worldly, take no shit, I keep a switchblade in my purse girl.
Right.
Who I'll add I like as a character, because I think a lot of the time us male writers, particularly us male writers that write science fiction, are always at risk of making female characters the pixie dream girl,
right,
or the walking vagina.
They used to. I mean, science fiction has a fairly well earned reputation, at least older science fiction, of women just kind of being the large breasted,
right?
Like, yeah, the walking vagina.
I love Robert Heinlein, but Robert and to Robert Heinlein's credit, I think Robert Heinlein was progressive in his era, because the women he was writing were very intelligent and very capable.
Right.
But every Heinlein story has a moment where the 25-year-old who's talking to the 50-year-old protagonist is like wildly in love with him, and they just finished having sex, will, for no reason, unbidden, give a monologue about how I'm so in love with you and I'm so crazy about you, but I understand that I can't keep you to myself, and if you ever need to sleep with other women, it's like, where is this coming from? Like it's like Heinlein's trying to convince his wife to do wife swapping or something. Anyway, that happens a lot in science fiction. Where it's like,
especially older science fiction.
Or the girl is the MacGuffin, or she's the damsel in distress. But a lot of the time, women are inactive characters in science fiction,
right? And that is not the case in this story.
No, she is an active character, and she has. I think she's a character that has deep pathos to her, combined with fun moxie,
right?
And is the one driving the plot forward.
Right.
The main character is just kind of swept up in this adventure. She's the one that's driving it forward. And I do have a story with a femme fatale in it. Like there is the blonde that's going to kill you.
There's nothing wrong with that if that's not everything that's ever.
But I'd say most of the women in the series, I put a plug about this in the end notes. Like most of the women in the anthology, I feel like I like them in that. They are not heroines; they are just deeply, deeply adults. Like they're most of the women in the story, like the one that we were just discussing, the man behind the curtain. Like something bad happens, and they look around and go, "Really, somebody should deal with this." Oh no, am I? I am the one who has to deal with. And like, I respect that's kind of the everyman step up to the plate character, and that's the women characters I tend to write tend to be in that category. And this character was as well. So I really enjoyed that. And I also thought that, I also did a little bit of a sneaky move with readers. So I don't know if you picked up on this, and I don't think this gives away too much of the plot, but, the girl is trying to get back to Hershey, Pennsylvania, where she grew up in an orphanage.
Right.
And we learn over the course of the story that the reason she's going back is because Mr. Eichenbetter is dying. And this is a man that has some level of intensity to her. And the way it is expressed, we're just talking writer tactics right now. I'm no longer
Hey, you guys stop listening.
Yeah,
don't pay attention to this part. This is just us.
Yeah, we're going tactical rather than thematic, right?
Yeah.
But main character says, Brandon or Brian says, who is that guy? And she says, he was my high school science teacher. He was also my first kiss. Okay, well, that's not all right. We're kind of weird. And then as the story progresses, and you're hearing this internal monologue from her perspective, and she's this rather hardened character already in high school. She doesn't have friends. She's a loner. She doesn't have boyfriends. And she just is not adjusting to high school very well. And the only person that's nice to her in this entire school is Mr. Eichenbetter. And he is goofy. He's just kind of the stereotypical fun dad vibe, dad energy.
He's
professor.
Mr. Holland in Mr. Holland's
Yes,
opus, but also fun, more fun, I guess.
Right, and probably with less dignitas than, than Richard Dreyfuss. And one of the things, he takes kids geocaching, and he was going to do it on the Saturday of prom, but everybody had a prom date except for her. So he ends up taking her, and they go to Centralia, Pennsylvania, which real story, by the way. Centralia is a real town in Pennsylvania.
I didn't know that.
Oh, it is. There's a coal fire underneath it right now.
Oh, I did know that.
It was an old coal mining town.
It's still going, right?
It's still going. It's projected to go for 500 years.
That's insane.
It's an old coal mining town. The actual coal mines caught fire. They're still going, but they're geocaching.
We haven't tapped that for energy use in any sort of way.
Not
we haven't
yet.
built a plant over a power plant over it or anything?
Yeah, but he, at one point, there's literally a vent with this hot air coming out, and I wanted that to almost feel like temptation, because I want the readers to feel real uncomfortable.
Oh, that's a really good...
Is this guy going to molest this poor girl? And then what happens is she just kisses him because she's a teenager, and she has a crush on him, and she doesn't know how this works, and he pulls back, and you realize that this is not at all what he's up to.
Right.
He is a genuinely nice guy, but I wanted to have that tension building of this is a bad man. No, actually no. Hey, good news. Of the bad things that have happened in this story, this is not one of them. He is a legitimately good person. She is going back to have a good moment with somebody. We are going to get to witness this vulnerable, tender part of their lives.
Right. And also, the thing about that is there is no villain in that moment, because she's just a kid.
Yeah.
And her perception is, her brain's not even formed at this point. I want to ask you something, because I may agree that this is the best written story in the book. So everybody who is an aspiring writer at some point read Stephen King's book on writing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have gone back and forth with in terms of character writing over the years, and really plot writing as well, is whether or not he's right about the way that he perceives writing stories and writing characters, which is that they are fossils that you sort of unearth through the process of writing. That they are some sort of fully formed thing that's embedded in your mind as the writer, that it's not even so much that you're creating them as you are uncovering them.
Right.
And do you feel that there's anything to that in your own writing process, or do you think that it is when you're creating a character like that, you're obviously thinking deeply about things that aren't going to make it on the page about this character. To some extent, you've got an idea about them, maybe how they look, or maybe some aspect of their character that won't even necessarily show up on the page, but it informs their character. Much like an actor,
right,
might create a backstory to their character that doesn't all come out on screen. So I'm curious if you've got, what's your insight into that? Do you think that, or do you even know?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to parse out there. First of all, On Writing is a great book, and
Sure.
the thing that I most remember from On Writing, which I do think is really salient for anybody writing a novel, is just write 1,000 words every night.
Yeah.
And the great thing about that, the reason that works is it's not just that you're accumulating the word count; it's that you are writing so frequently that your subconscious brain is employed in the act of it.
Yeah.
So that when you sit down, you will be able to write because you've literally been working on it all day, and the book is worth it in and of that. I think that is. Like I don't know that they're at war, but those are the two different kind of variations of fiction writing, right? Are you outlining and then writing, or is it emergent?
Right.
I went to a writers' conference years ago where one of the guys had spent most of his life being a reporter before he started writing fiction, and the other guy had been, I think, like a detective or something. And the reporter cum fiction writer liked being surprised, and that kind of made sense because he had been
Sure.
somebody that had spent a lifetime, reacting and responding and documenting. Whereas the other guy, I don't remember what his job was, but his was much more strategic. He outlined it. I don't know that I have a clear orientation for either one. It kind of varies. I think it's much more fun to do it emergently than it is to do it top down. That said, if I'm writing a longer work like a book, I think you have to do outlining at some point. I do believe in there's a rhythm to a story.
Yeah.
There's certainly a rhythm to a novel.
Right.
And that requires that you either have it down so intuitively that it's going to manifest without you thinking about it, or that you sit down and go, okay, the character needs to, if we're going to rely on Campbell, needs to have the first confrontation and it goes
Right.
awry, and then he licks his wounds and he tries it again. That requires some amount of outlining.
I think it can either require outlining, or I think King's perspective on that, if I understood it correctly, was that a lot of that gets done in the second draft. But I mean, that's just a writing style for one particular writer.
It's. I mean, I'm trying to think because I did both. I've used both tacks in this short story collection. So like one of them that was, a couple of them that were entirely emergent were. Another recent one that I wrote in the last 6 to 8 months is the Grammy for the Best Alien Boy Band,
which is a great story.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And that one, I just sat down, and for the record, I'd been wanting to write a premise for years. I don't want to spoil this.
Yeah.
The ending to the story that Jennings, and that some other people know that have listened to the Political Orphanage, because I did put it on there. But anyway, for anybody not familiar, I'm not going to. I thought that premise to that story of why the aliens are on Earth was very funny.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a story about that. And that kind of started, I started writing it, and by the end, what I realized I was really doing was I was writing a story about xenophilia, as opposed to xenophobia, of people that, because it ended up being political satire, which was people who go, oh, America's horrible. I went to, deep down, I'm French.
Yeah.
I went to France when I was in college on a study abroad thing, but I was born by some cosmic fluke in Illinois. But I'm a sophisticated European. And what they're really saying is like, look, like I am putting our country down in order to feel more sophisticated, which I think is self-indulging and irritating, as opposed to here are problems, I want to fix them, right? That one was an emergent one, and it turned out I was dealing with two things in it. But I think science fiction can handle that.
That story is a beautiful literary sneer on the part of Andrew Heaton.
Yeah, that is literally
it.
me sneering. I will not mention who, but you and I are friends with a prominent conservative radio host that I'm planning to give a side copy of the book to. And literally, I'm going to say, I would never ask a grown man to read a short story collection during peacetime. But I think you will enjoy this one story. Here's why I'm making fun of this particular thing. That was emergent. One of them that I really struggled with, actually two of them that I really struggled with. Your favorite short story, that was the third draft, and they were all completely different. The timeline infractions.
I remember you calling me about that.
I call that was a whole
trying to brainstorm a little bit.
That story. What initially launched that story years ago. I've been working on that story for years. I wrote 3 completely distinct separate stories, and like they all involved different things. The reason that I started writing was I thought it was a fascinating premise to have a character who's a time traveler that goes into the future past when his wife is dead so that he can sleep around, because technically he's a widower.
Technically he's a widower.
Timeline,
She's
right? And the more I played with this, I was like, I can't. It just doesn't work, and like at one point the character goes into the future, and I ended up rewriting the entire thing where
Yeah.
it doesn't have like it that is in there, but it is just a sub point, right?
Yeah.
But I struggled with it. But in terms of the outlining and plot thing, there's one in there called "Smooth Heads Don't Fit," and I wrote the first half of that where it's back and forth. The whole story is back and forth letters, but the first 3 volleys are very I very intentionally wanted the writing to feel like you're intercepting emails from 10-year-olds,
Right.
and they're just breathless and enthusiastic and fun. But once they got past that, I struggled from where to take it. We also talked about that.
Yeah. Do you want to let the listener in just a little bit on the plot there in terms of who we're talking about with letters?
Yeah. So
without giving away the ending.
In Smooth Heads Don't Fit, and I'm also is paying homage to M.R. Carey, who wrote The Girl with All the Gifts, because this is a tool that I learned from him that I incorporated into this story. You're reading the first letter, and it's like, "Dear Brittany, I have never had a pen pal before. I am so excited to meet you. Please do not tell me that I'm ugly. A girl told me I'm ugly, and it really hurt my feelings. Your friend Rock." And you're like, "Oh," and he says, "I've never had a human pen pal friend before." So already we know he's not human.
Something's off, yeah.
And then Brittany responds, "I would never. I see your picture. You're not ugly at all." And like, he sends her a leaf from his house, and she said, "Oh, it's oak. Like we have this where I'm from." And she sends a picture of her mom, and it smells really good, and he puts it in the pencil box. And what you realize after a little bit is these are kids, and it's very sweet, and they're having this like really enthusiastic, "I love giraffes. I went to the zoo. Do you like dogs?" But what you're realizing over the course of this is one of them is a little human girl that's normal. One of them's a Neanderthal, and we have in the last 60 years cloned Neanderthals out of nothing, and they are now a part of human society. And that, that's one of the other disturbing things I put in there, because I want people to go, "This sounds fucked up. What's happening?"
Right.
He says like, "I live in Detroit. My grandfather used to live in the zoo, but he asked to be let out, and they eventually let him out." And you're like, what the? And it's like, well, you gather that in this world, we brought Neanderthals back and just put them in zoos for a while, but they could talk. And eventually we were like, we really should let them out. And now they're kind of living in slums.
I will say it's the most, in many ways, it's the most disturbing story in the book. I remember the first time I read it, and this was before it got put into the book. So it was pre some editing and changes and stuff. I remember putting that story down and feeling a little depressed, honestly. Like it just.
Well, the other thing, that one I had to kind of outline that one, and I had to figure out. I did outline that. I had to figure out where I was going with it. It didn't work emergently. Again, I tried it several times. The initial volleys I love, because the initial volley is both breathless kid narration and mounting what the hell, and then realizing that there's an interesting premise to the story of like, which is where this came from. It was, what would happen if Neanderthals came back?
And by the way, side note, I think you write children very well.
Thank you.
I think you can write from the perspective of a child very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good skill to have.
What I ended up where I ended up wanting to take that story without spoiling it is I didn't want it to become a racial allegory. I felt like other people have done things like that in the past. That would be fine if I did, but
sure.
I didn't want it because he is living in the slums in Detroit, a Neanderthal slum. I didn't want it to be an allegory for American apartheid, white versus black. Because I didn't think I would have much to add to that, and I also feel like I'm a little bit late to that. But what I did think would be interesting was playing around with things that you and I have talked about a lot in the past, which is I don't really think the civilization we live in is ideally designed for humans. And what I realized I'm kind of doing is I'm basically channeling Rousseau. And I'm, oh my God, this is so nerdy. I am.
Wait a minute. Nerdy on this podcast? Fuck no.
As you know, Jennings, I am a committed Lockean.
That's true.
However, Rousseau is a guy that's like, people are pretty good, but we've created a warped system that's screwing up the people. We've got to fix that system. And that's what that story is dealing with, is that interplay between the system we've created and whether it actually fits us or not. And the Neanderthals are a good vehicle for that, because they're outsiders that are able to go, hey, wait a minute, we just got here. This does not fit. This does not work for us or you. And so that one. And then to bring it all the way back to the original Stephen King thing you mentioned, there is one story in there that is straight up emulating Stephen King. And I did it very consciously, and that's...
And you did it damn well.
Thank you.
That is I don't want to give too much away, but it is the only scary story in the book.
It is a horror story.
It's a horror story.
There's a flat-out horror story in the book.
And I will say I have read a ton of horror at this point. I'm a bit of an acolyte of the horror story. Stephen King has been one of my favorite authors. It takes a lot to give me goosebumps. This story gave me goosebumps.
Thank you.
Like I had a straight up moment, and I won't reveal it, but there's a straight up moment in there that just every hair on my body stood up at that moment. I was like,
I'm really flattered to hear that, because I've not done much horror, but it was really fun, and I was emulating Stephen King. So that
did well.
That story's called The Whistler, and I incorporated a bunch of things into there, but I think it works. Because it kicks off with a Ouija board, and like it's this,
as all good stories do.
I don't believe in Ouija boards or demons, but I definitely fear both of them.
Right?
Like I don't believe in them, but I do fear them. And I'm like, seriously, people, I will not, like, if I'm at a party and somebody brings out a Ouija board, I leave the party.
Yep.
Like I will not be there. I've read too many weird paranormal stories that begin with a Ouija board and then a child being possessed, and I'm like. Probably nothing. It's probably literally just a little plastic doodad that Milton Bradley made.
I don't know, man.
But at the same time, though, if it is some signal flare to the ethereal realm we know nothing about, and you're inviting it to party in your house, I don't want to be here.
I went to my wife and I went to a Halloween themed party this past year, and they had a giant, and I mean like floor to ceiling, plastic. Drape basically that had a Ouija board on it, like in giant form.
Interesting.
And it was
like vertical, like
yeah.
Wall?
And it was supposed to. I don't think it was supposed to be functional, but it was like almost like a game. Like they had a big, huge planchette that you kind of held over it, and I looked at that and I was like, I
good, get a spotlight.
Yeah. I was like, I'm not gonna make us leave over this. But I'm definitely not participating in this, and neither are you.
Yeah.
And so we
I think
I'd
probably stay, but not look at it. That reminds me, there was a few years ago in Carlisle, which is kind of a little bit south of the English border with Scotland. It's on the English side, but they've been fighting over it for 2,000 years, right? Somebody found out that in like, I don't know, 1200 AD, the Bishop of Glasgow had cursed Carlisle. And had written this very ornate curse, and like probably old Celtic or something, of like, I call upon God to curse the people of Carlisle, and all these things. And the people in Carlisle thought it was really funny, so they had it like made on this big bronze placard. And then like the following week, the town flooded, and the football team lost, and like all that. It was like, well, what did you think would happen, you idiots? Like, you're really taunting people. So yeah, it kicks off with that, and the dual premise to the Whistler is there is an entity in the neighborhood that this is just local folklore. Right. The same, you have one in your town, whatever the thing is. But the folklore here is, if you're by yourself and on a certain night you're walking up the hill, in the woods from the cul-de-sac, there's this entity called the Whistler. Maybe it's a ghost. We don't really know what it is, but it's this guy that just whistles, and it's just really creepy whistling. And the kids are like, and he kills you? And it's like, no, he doesn't kill you. He just whistles, and he follows you around. But if you chase him, he'll run away. And he's always just 30 feet away, but he whistles, and it's real creepy. And they're like, well, that's a dumb thing. And they're like, look, I don't know what to tell you. That's what it is. It's this, like, you can chase him as fast as you want. You can't catch him. He'll kind of come after you, but he'll do it slow. So there's already this creepy thing. And I listen to a lot of paranormal podcasts. I love paranormal things that don't have a clear label.
Right.
I think that part of the fun and creepiness of them is the question mark.
Right.
When it's a werewolf, you know what a werewolf is. When it's a ghost, you know what a ghost is. When it's just a thing and you're like, it's a thing, but we don't know. I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, there's another thing, though, which is they summon through this Ouija board, they somehow alert something that appears to be some kind of doppelganger. And we don't know what it is, but we know that it's malicious. We know that it wants to lure children out of the house, and that...
I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
I'm going to stop you right there, because I'm in charge of this one,
Okay,
right?
you are. You're steering the ship.
I think you should stop right there
all right.
because I think you're just right on the edge of giving enough away that it will take away from the enjoyment of the story. But understand something, those of you listening, it gets so fucking terrifying from this point forward. It's really good. Buy the damn book.
Yeah, thank you.
Encourage your friends to buy the damn book.
But thank you very much. I'll say where the Stephen King thing gets into it, there is a kind of like, there's a sort of crucible moment that the protagonist goes through where, and I feel like that's a very Stephen King type thing, right? Stephen King, when he's writing, all of Stephen King's stories there is some kind of supernatural lattice work to the world. He does not, I have no idea what his religion is, but the worlds he writes have an intelligence of some kind behind it with some kind of rule-based rational thing we oftentimes don't know. But when you read Stephen King, you get the impression there's some kind of system in place that we don't quite know, but there's some sense to it.
If you read the Dark Tower series, then you understand most of what the rest of them are. But yes, that's an accurate representation.
And I feel like there's also a lot of the time, not quite a Joseph Campbell type thing, but there's a kind of test or crucible or something that somebody has to go through, some kind of, not just a ritual, but a trial that they must do in order to defeat the bad guy. And I was very conscious in writing that and borrowing that from Stephen King for that story. But I'm delighted you liked it.
It absolutely pays off. It's a worthwhile story. It's very good.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. So we'll probably wrap up here pretty shortly. Do you have any? So are there any additional things that you can think of that you want to impart to the audience that about this that would be an additional incentive for you to give him your money for this book? I'm trying to subliminally and superliminally suggest to them, buy this book because it's really good.
Well, again, I'll say, like, if you've been enjoying the podcast the last 2.5 years, you'll like the book.
Of course,
I would literally be amazed if you didn't, and I'll, probably return. If you can find me in person, I'll return your money. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna do this by email. But if you find me, you're like, I didn't like the book.
You got to give him the copy back.
You have to give me the copy back, or delete it off your Kindle. But if
you have it, yeah.
But if it's that bad, I will give you your money back. I will say I was surprised in retrospect, because again, this is over 10 years, and I didn't write this as a short story collection. It just turned into one.
Right.
I was surprised to find that there were themes in it that kept popping up that I think are unique to me, or if not unique to me, or at least very Heaton. So
they're very Andrew Heaton flavored.
Yeah. Like one of the, I didn't plan it this way, a lot of the characters are bureaucrats. Like a surprising amount of them.
Imagine
that. But they're also not. They're not generally the bad guys either. Like it's not like Career Diplomat, which I wrote while I was very depressed in Washington, D.C., and was thinking I might go work for the State Department when I wrote that. And the premise to that one, which I do want to talk to you a little bit about, because
sure.
The premise to that one is there is a State Department official who has been dispatched to this planet called Riff, and
oh yes, and I read this. You wrote this a long time ago.
It's about 10 years old, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember reading it way back.
But he's a State Department guy, and he's the protagonist in there. The Time Travel Bureau story that we've alluded to a couple of times, which I think people will have already listened to by the time this episode comes out. The narrator is a bureaucrat, and I'm playing a game there too. By the way, one of the things I've learned actually from the audience is that people like. They like torturing a character that refuses to have fun. Like, people really enjoy that. Like the second Snuffy's Christmas special. There's this prolonged ice skating story
where just beautiful.
Where this is unrelated to the book, but the premise is that Snuffy's has sponsored the Nutcracker Suite, but they've insisted that there be a horse in it. So that it's this
on ice.
An ice skating rink with this inexplicable Clydesdale that can't ice skate and is just sitting there, and it's ridiculous. And the guy that plays Drosselmeyer fucking hates this horse because it's ruining ballet. But like, everybody else likes the horse. Everybody else is having fun. Like, this is cool. We got a horse on ice skates. Why can't you get? And he just gets like smacked around and beaten, like the horse
mayhem
kicks
and
him,
death and
all
everything.
these. The longer you live, people are like they love it because he's somehow the villain for not having fun. And that's what I'm doing. Like the bureaucrat in regarding your timeline infractions is to some extent doing that. He's
right.
The character that he's describing is clearly a miscreant. It's clearly a reprobate, but at the same time, kind of charming.
He's fun. He's
definitely fun.
You'd have a beer with him.
He's your hot mess friend that's been married like 6 times. You know, like he's not exactly a loser. He's just a mess.
Right.
But he's a fun guy.
Yeah.
And so I did that. What I will say for career diplomat, I think for people that really have consumed a lot of science fiction, as anybody that's still listening to this point of the program has definitely done, and likes it. What initially, because that story is really kind of dealing with depression and belonging. That's ultimately what career diplomat is about. I didn't set out to write that. The premise that kicked it off was, I find it interesting in science fiction that one, Earth always is united when it starts talking to other civilizations. Very rare to have a non-united. It's always the United Nations.
Right.
And I was like, no, I think it would be really interesting if like the American State Department has an embassy on a planet, but also France does. And also all these things, and like, which as of now is how we would do things. I thought that would be interesting. But the main thing, the premise that kicked it off that I just thought was interesting was I've traveled a lot. I love traveling. It's also incredibly irritating. And what I mean is it's irritating on a minor level. It's wonderful on a spiritual level and a knowledge quest level. But you go to another country and you're like, oh, it turns out I'm allergic to this country. And also it turns out that I get dysentery from eating your food. And you all like use too much oil and that doesn't sit right with me. And I got altitude sickness, right? It doesn't happen all the time. But it occurs to me, like in the world of Star Trek, planets come in like 3 forms.
Right.
Earth, red sky, and green sky.
And green sky,
That's
that's exactly what I was going to say.
They're all basically Southern California for some reason. There's very, very little variation there, right? And so like I wanted to make Riff I wanted to drive home how unspeakably horrible you could live there, but it would you'd hate it. It's Riff has their day lasts about a year. So you have 6, like dawn lasts 3 months, sunset lasts 3 months, 6 months of darkness.
Yeah.
And like just think about like that, like kind of Alaska, Sweden phenomenon, but even larger, right?
Right. Yeah.
And flip side, how much they hate visiting our planet, because in their mind, a day lasts about a year, right? And then they come here, and it's like living on a strobe light.
Yeah.
Where just like it would be like it would be the equivalent of us like being locked in a room with a strobe light constantly and getting like epileptic seizures.
Right.
The humidity there, it's all damp. It's always raining.
Yeah.
It's 80%. The mold is incredible. Everybody is so allergic to the planet that you have to take daily allergy shots.
Right.
And then the other thing that I wanted to play with too in that one is not only is the planet, like again, it's an M-class planet.
Right.
We can live there, but it's just it is so, picture like the place you've been to on Earth that was just the least hospitable to you. It's that only on steroids, right? I think if space travel were real, that would be very common. It would be very odd for me, a guy with allergies, if I just wasn't allergic to any other planet. I find that very unlikely, right? The other thing that I wanted to play with that, and I have to be careful here, in most science fiction, either there is hostile bigotry that must be overcome, and there is a learning lesson in how bigotry is awful, a la Independence Day or something like that. We're just over, right? Or I'm a human, but you're a Vulcan, and we love each other, and we're going to have babies, right? So, like all sentient creatures are basically the same, and there's just cosmetic differences. And one of the things I wanted to play in with that story was the humans really find the locals irritating, and vice versa.
Yeah.
They like so for example, they have no concept of metaphor. So if we said, I see your point, piece of cake, they're like, poetry again. Like that, it's just gibberish to them. And they think we are so pretentious and so like woo-woo. They think we're all hippies because we say things that don't mean anything all the time. And we think they don't have a good sense of humor. And then meanwhile, the way they talk to be respectful, their formal, respectful tone of voice is basically Gilbert Gottfried of like, "Hi, good to see you." Like that's how they talk, to the point where they have Gilbert Gottfried do the American answering services at the embassy. But we sound to them like, "Hi, I'm Josh Jennings, good to meet you," and like, and everybody consciously knows that this is because we're from different planets. It has nothing to do but I still fucking, it drives
Can't
me
stand you.
batshit.
Yeah.
And I have one of the characters say that. He says, "Listen, I have nothing against humans. I have nothing against your planet. You seem fine. I really don't like you."
Yeah.
And I feel like that gray zone of like innate irritation without a good reason is a different phenomenon than bigotry or xenophilia.
Sure,
And
yeah.
I don't see that in science fiction very often, of just, look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the people on this planet. I'm just telling you the tone they use drives me batshit.
Yeah.
And it's fine. And I get it. They're not doing it to piss me off, but it pisses me off. And I thought that I never see science fiction do that. And I thought that would be interesting.
Yeah. It's very interesting to see. So that I think leads me into kind of the overview that I want to give, sort of to wrap up here. What you were just talking about really meshes, it dovetails nicely with what kind of the way I'd like to wrap up here, which is, so I know and have known throughout my life a number of writers. I've been a writer since I was 10. I've wanted to that's what I wanted to do with my life, and I kind of dedicated myself to it. So I know writers who are serious. I know writers who are not, writers who are aspiring writers in the way that we defined them at the beginning of this. And I'm not going to end this by just blowing smoke and saying, "Oh, you're the best writer I've ever," all that. But I do genuinely want to tell you and your audience, you are one of the most dedicated writers I've ever met.
Thank you.
You're dedicated not only to the idea, but to the craft itself. When you produce something, you want it to be the best that it possibly can be, and you will do your damnedest to make sure that happens, to the point of rewriting a story 3 separate times in 3 separate ways. I can tell you, I have never and probably will never do that. I have tried rewriting a story a couple of times, and just starting from scratch, but never when I had a whole story already written. Like that both horrifies me to hear you say that, but also like it fills me with like admiration, because you knew it wasn't right the first time through, and you went back, you squished the clay back into a ball and started remolding it into the thing you wanted. And I really admire that. It really comes out in these stories, and I'm damn proud of you. I'm proud to be your friend, and I enjoy the hell out of this book. I enjoy the hell out of pretty much anything you write. For those of you listening, not just please buy the book, but please understand that when you buy the book and you open it up, so much intellectual capital, so much blood, sweat, and tears, so many goddamn hours of sitting alone at a computer. Like, I think Stephen King refers to writing as like crossing the Atlantic in a bathtub.
Yeah.
Like it's a very lonely job.
Yeah.
So much work goes into creating something that then gets cut down, edited, polished, read over, and typeset and printed, to produce what sits in front of you. And like I want you to buy the book, and I want you to appreciate how much work went into it, and I want you to appreciate Andrew, because you, sir, are a phenomenal writer, and I'm very happy you're my friend.
Oh, Thank you very much. That means a lot to me.
That's the show. No, I just.
Thank you very much. I am also glad we're friends. Josh Jennings, I love you.
I love you too, buddy.
And I was very, very happy to dedicate the book in your honor.
And I was very honored to have it dedicated to me.
Thank you. And I'll say for anybody that's already purchased the book, if Jennings pulled on your heartstrings right there with the very accurate assessment of the immense amount of thankless work that goes into writing a book, if you've purchased the book and you enjoyed it, please review it on Amazon. That actually helps me out a lot, because when I get new books in the future, or if I do go with a larger publishing house, it really reflects a lot better on me if they look and see that there's 300 5-star reviews,
right?
As opposed to like if there's 10. So that actually does really help. I am too terrified to read any of the reviews on Amazon, but I think I will ask Jennings to take the ones that are nice and send them to me. However, I will say people that have emailed me, I absolutely emailed them, and I even save them in a file. So that when I'm bummed out and I'm like, I will never, why am I doing this? I'll go through it, I'll read them, and those mean a lot to me too. So thank you. So Jennings, thank you very much for doing this with me. And everybody at home, this is literally the closest thing I've ever done to masturbating in front of several thousand people.
Except for that one time that you actually...
Except for that one time. This is the closest thing. So thanks for going on this journey with us. The book is Inappropriately Human, 21 short stories. Thanks, Jennings, and thanks to everybody for listening.
And I want to close out the show by saying, that's the show. Thank you, Andrew Heaton, for coming on my podcast to talk about your book. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Eric Stipe, for editing. And tally ho.
Very nice. Thank you.